Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so I asked a lot of you guys if you wanted us to continue doing any of like the tie-ins for the King in Black, because one thing to keep in mind, the conclusion for King in Black and the conclusion for, I guess really the Venom part of King in Black, those were pushed back by like 2 or 3 weeks by Marvel, right? So it's out of my hands. Like a lot of you guys have been like, when are you gonna cover King in Black again? I have to wait for those stories to come out, guys. I can't cover them before they come out because I haven't read them yet. So I asked you guys if you wanted me to cover tie-ins. A lot of you guys are like, sure, right? I mean, it's a great way to kind of keep King in Black going while we're just waiting for the other stuff to come out. So in this one, we're covering the Captain America one-shot that comes during King in Black. And this is amazing, right? This one-shot's really good because it kind of deals with the struggle of Captain America right now. Initially, this focuses on the Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, and Sam Wilson essentially facing off against, some of Knull's forces. There's a little bit to see here, but the reality when it comes to Falcon and the Winter Soldier is we're getting this because of the show. That's really the biggest reason why you see them here. Otherwise, it would focus almost exclusively on Steve Rogers, and you'll understand why once we actually get to his character. But for the most part, they're just kind of fighting out on the fringes, right? And what this means, for those guys who don't know, the way the King in Black event is unfolded is you have Knull, the symbiote god, the person who created like all the symbiotes that more or less exist across the Marvel multiverse, who's arrived here on Earth for the purpose of taking it over and essentially ensnaring it and just calling it another conquered world and another conquered universe. And so what you have is basically the fringe battles where you've got people who are helping civilians get out of New York and trying to avoid whatever threats happen to be in this immediate area. Then you've got those who are trying to face off against Knull directly, right? And so what you have with Winter Soldier and Sam Wilson is they're facing off or I guess they're really doing the fringe conflicts, right? So kind of taking these little pot shots at these small little forces that Knull has and trying to get people out of danger, right? Trying to get them away. The reason why you have this is because these guys don't really have any unique or special abilities, right? Bucky Barnes is a really cool fighter. Sam Wilson flies, and that's really all you have, right? I mean, there's really not much doing there. So in terms of it being powerful enough to like possess Celestials and bend them to his will, a guy who by all standards of measurement seems in some form or fashion to even be beyond Galactus, yeah, you're not gonna have a whole lot doing here in terms of like Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson. They're not gonna win the fight, you know what I mean? And so while they're facing off against these guys, they are kind of being overwhelmed initially, but then here comes Steve Rogers to save the day. Now, the important thing to understand here is that Steve Rogers was one of the first superheroes that was taken by Knull and conscripted into his forces and possessed by a symbiote. But because of the actions of Eddie Brock, Venom's son, Dylan, basically freeing Captain America alongside a handful of others, Steve Rogers is back into the fray again. The cool thing about this is that even though his mind and body have been freed from Knull, he still has the influence of Knull in him, in the sense that there's still a tether there, and Knull is still able to basically talk to him, right, to mess with his mind. And that's one of the things that he struggles with, right? Knull kind of says things all the time that where Steve Rogers sort of muses to himself about how he doesn't really have any extraordinary abilities, but his ability to rally people, right, his ability to organize war fronts and to move people in this kind of forward direction to constantly win the battle is a kind of ability that very few people have. And so people see him with respect, right? That when Captain America arrives on the scenes, their hearts bolster a little bit. And it's like, okay, we can win this, right? Captain America's here. That he's really in a lot of ways there for moral support. And I don't really say that to kind of tear him down, like Captain America's a cheerleader for the Avengers because his powers suck. I don't really mean to say that. I simply mean to say that he is such a presence on the field that when there is some disorganization and disarray, Captain America knows how to fix it, right? He knows how to reorganize everybody and get back into the conflict again. And so a big boost of confidence comes with him arriving here. But as he muses with this, Knull chimes in and says, but do they realize how much of a liar you are? Like, do they know how you see them, children running from the real battle? In Times Square, the real heroes may be dying, but they're not dying facing me, not picking off the fringe, right? And it's one of these things where this almost kind of seems to be an attitude that Captain America has. And that's one of the things that makes Knull such a tricky individual, is that where Knull chimes in and Knull tells you these things, in a lot of ways, it's hard to know whether it's an actual thought you have in your subconscious or if it's him just telling you this stuff. And he kind of says like this mission, like what Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson are doing, it's a cowardly little mission that they're on, which I imagine is why you were so eager to join them, isn't it? Right? We both know what you are. And it's really Knull just kind of saying, you're a coward. And it's one of these things where he starts kind of screwing with his mind to a degree. He says like, why don't I borrow you for a moment, Captain America, Your philosophical whining is holding up the inevitable. Stop acting as if this is the first time you've lost control. Accept that you will hurt the ones you love over and over and over again. If you stopped screaming into the void for a moment, you'd realize this is hardly your fault. You cannot help being a perfect vehicle for violence and betrayal. After all, would this be happening if you hadn't joined the fight in the first place? Finally, I think we're getting to the truth of it. The reason why this line is really given by Knull when it comes to Steve Rogers is because this has happened more than once, right? If you go back and you read Captain America Volume 3 from the late 1990s, he was possessed by Nightmare, and Nightmare almost conquered the world because of Captain America. You read a story like Secret Empire and an Avengers standoff, where Red Skull gets a hold of a cosmic cube and he uses it to alter the history of Steve Rogers, where Steve Rogers has been a Hydra agent this entire time and then successfully conquers North America, right? You look at the events of like Civil War, when Steve Rogers was so swept up in whether or not he was right, he never really took the time to think how it was splitting the superhero community apart. And then once he did, he stood down. But time and time again, there have been instances when Steve Rogers leads people into a fight and they all die. Age of Ultron is another example, right? The Steve Rogers was one of the first people on the battlefield when Ultron basically took control of Vision and then started replicating himself in the present day while operating from the future. Captain America led the charge. The Fantastic Four, almost, like a whole host of the X-Men, so many superheroes died during that conflict. And Steve Rogers was the one who led the charge. Now, does this mean to say that Steve Rogers is negligent or somehow inept as a superhero? No, that's not what that's designed to mean. Steve Rogers, at the end of the day, really is only human, and he cannot see what's coming later on down the road. He does what he does because he believes it's the right thing to do, and even if only on some level, because it's always worked before. But there have been multiple instances where because of his actions, superheroes have been killed, or they've been captured, or the battle's gone south, or something like that. And that's what Knull ties into. That's what Knull feeds on, that self-doubt, those instances when it's kind of like, am I really doing the right thing? That's what he feeds on. And that's really one of the things that Steve Rogers kind of chimes on here, that if Steve Rogers is this sort of nerve center of the superhero community, he knows everybody's strengths, he knows everybody's weaknesses, and that's how he's able to function in the way that he is in terms of galvanizing people towards a particular goal, or being this individual that everybody can rally around. Then what happens when that guy who knows so much about the superhero community becomes a bad guy? And he kind of, reminisces on this when he was possessed by Knull, right? He says, like, for a brief moment, Knull is silent again, but there is no relief. All I have is shaken horror. The uncertainty almost was. It's one of these things where he almost kind of looks to Bucky, right? Where Bucky's kind of like, okay, me and Sam Wilson are gonna go do this thing. And he's like, no, I'm gonna go take care of this, right? Just kind of this effort to demonstrate that he's not really as fearful as he feels. And when Bucky says, like, if you're not ready to be out here, Steve, tell me now. His whole stance is, there's no good answer to that, right? Bucky knows part of it. All three of us know what happens when Captain America isn't ready, but I'm not sure that they aren't in any more danger because of the man wearing the suit. One of the things to keep in mind here, when Bucky Barnes became Captain America, he wasn't ready for it. When Sam Wilson became Captain America, he wasn't ready for it, right? Sam Wilson, even like with the AmeriCops, right? The fact that he allowed his emotions to get the better of his judgment and pummeled those guys, created this image that Captain America stands against authority, right? The Captain America is a revolutionary. He's a rebel. He's inciting rebellion and insurrection against the US government. That's the image that was painted of Sam Wilson. And it was the position the US government used to strip him from the position of Captain America, which is when they sent John Walker, US agent, to take the shield from him. Now, of course, that whole thing was instigated by Steve Rogers when he was a Hydra agent, but the fact remains, like, each one of these guys has donned the Captain America suit, the Captain America role, and all the authority and respect that goes with it. And in more than one instance, they have demonstrated that there have been times when the role got the better of them. And that's when Knull starts to chime back in, right? Captain America kind of says, like, suit up, right? I got this. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. And he says, I lied to them. And in turn, Knull says, you lied to yourself. You are disgustingly dramatic. Do you think that if you put on a theater of saving these worthless creatures, you'll somehow become what they think you are? The man who does what needs doing. You perform a role for them, even when no one applauds. How many times have you said those words? Do you believe them? I've got you. I've got you. Don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. Do you know that no amount of repetition makes your triteness a reality? Did you forget already how little it takes to slither in, to control you, to make you a lie? You're a fool. How dare you tell anyone you've got them when you can't even control yourself? This is how Knull takes control of people. This is one of the reasons why the creation of Knull by Donny Cates is so amazing, because when you see villains out there, you see the different villains that people face off against, right? You've got Dr. Octopus, who takes over the body of Peter Parker, he becomes Superior Spider-Man. You know, it's like he gets a bit of a redemption story, but the plots and the schemes and the mechanisms of those guys, you can set your watch by them. It's only when you come across a villain that's truly interesting, that truly has personality and knows how to get inside you in the worst ways, that they really become intriguing. Magneto is a perfect example of that. You see these characters like this that have so much character and so much depth. William Stryker, some religious fundamentalist who believed it was his mission from God to kill mutants, has some of the best character development in the history of Marvel Comics. That's when things get so cool. That's when they get so intriguing. And so as this continues on, and despite the fact that Captain America's traumatic experience being possessed by Knull, the knowledge of knowing that with Knull having his knowledge, that he could in turn take over and pretty much destroy the entire super community from the inside out by knowing all their strengths and weaknesses, when he tells Sam Wilson, like, it's okay, you know, everything's cool, Sam Wilson sees right through it. And this makes sense, right? Because where you look at Sam Wilson, you see him as a person who became Captain America. If you see it within that singular lens, that singular prism, then no, then it's just kind of like, well, this is just being done for the sake of a story. But one thing to understand, Sam Wilson's been Captain America's friends for years, right? He's been his friend for years and years and years and years. They were sidekicks for a long time. And in some ways, Sam Wilson knows Steve Rogers better than he knows himself. He knows him better than Bucky Barnes does, even though Bucky Barnes and Captain America have a friendship that predates that between Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson, that in the times when Bucky was basically believed to have been dead, you had Sam Wilson stepping in to kind of fill that role and play the sidekick slash friend of Steve Rogers all that time. And so initially Sam's like, okay, you know, I can kind of accept this for the moment, but the reality is neither of them's really buying it, right? Like neither of them is really buying into this idea that like everything is okay with Steve Rogers. And so that's one of the crazy things is Steve says, it's easy to pretend the reason I don't speak up is because we have so little time. And that's when Knull chimes in again. You should have told them the truth, right? But how do you tell your buddies how hard you've fallen? Don't worry, Captain Rogers, I will tell them for you. And that's one of the crazy things is Knull's forces immediately come descending down to sort of seize on Captain America, Sam Wilson, and Bucky Barnes, knowing that in this moment that Steve Rogers is going to do something that he almost never does, that he's seemingly going to hesitate and he's almost going to panic. But he counters this and he says, no, I don't have time to panic or make decisions. Knull's been throwing this kind of thing inside my head, throwing these images inside my head, right? Making me see things that aren't necessarily there. But what I'm seeing here is real. This dragon going after Sam Wilson is a real and tangible thing. And so he kind of muses. He says, instead of sitting there trying to figure out what I should do or panicking or anything like that, I just go into action, right? Like I grab sound grenades, I ignore the sounds of Knull, right? I drop grenades as automatically as I pick them up. The symbiote mass recoils from the vibrations. I don't look below me, right? Even as Knull's snarling taunts grow in my ears, I keep moving. In order for Steve Rogers to operate at his most effective, he almost has to be on autopilot here. And that's when Knull finally chimes back in again. It says, how many times must you fall before you understand? You slip and everything falls apart. Everything goes to pieces. And it's almost as though he kind of makes fun of him, right? He says like, if you didn't insist on being on the front line leading the battle, I never would have gotten my hooks in. What a hero you are, Steve Rogers, leading your friends into their own demise, leading your friends into their own death to be captured, to be tortured by me, subdued, and drawn into my forces. What a hero you are. And that's the crazy thing is at the end of the day, Steve Rogers really is doing the right thing here, right? He's fighting the good fight against these guys. But that's what makes this story of Captain America so wildly intriguing, is because Knull is presented to us here as self-doubt, anxiety, fear, all the negative emotions that paralyze us as people, that shut us down. In those moments when we look to a situation and we're not entirely certain of what to do, and that fear starts to creep in, that small little voice in the back of your head, well, what if this goes wrong? What if this is the wrong call? What if this is a mistake? Imagine what your life is going to look like. Imagine how terrible everything is going to be. That's what Knull is, right? He represents that fear, that doubt, that anxiety, you know, those moments when you just want to stop and just sit down and do nothing because the fear of doing something and doing the wrong thing is almost crippling. And the great thing about this is what's so significant about this, is that Captain America does the only thing he can do, and he reaches out, right? He reaches out to Sam Wilson and to Bucky Barnes. And he says like, I can't, right? I can't reach for the shield. I can't keep going anymore. And they're like, yes, you can, right? Like that, you're Captain Captain America, man. We've all been down this road. We've all been down this path. Sam even goes as far as to say, like, whatever you're about to say, ask yourself, is it what you want to say, or is it what he'd want you to say? And the question Steve asks is, how did you know? Right? How did you know I was struggling in this way? And they're all like, because we've all struggled in that way. And that's true, right? That's the important thing to understand here. Bucky Barnes was literally tortured and brainwashed constantly by the Russians and used as an assassin, killing however many untold numbers of people, not because he wanted to, but because he was made to, right? They've all got their own demons. Sam Wilson has his own demons. Everybody has skeletons in the closet, but you can't let that cripple you, right? You can't let the mistakes that you've made in the past determine what decisions you're going to make in the future. To a degree, they do, sure. But just because you screwed up before does not guarantee that you're going to screw up again. And that's the important thing to get here. That's why this story is so great. That yes, Captain America led the charge, and the risk he took in leading that charge against Knull's forces when this whole conflict went off is that he would be captured, and his knowledge of the superhero community would be used against the superhero community. But everybody knew that was the risk. It's not as though he was the only one who knew. Everybody knew what they were doing, and they understood the risk that they were taking. Not only could something like that happen, they could die, but the risk of being destroyed or the risk of being manipulated and tricked by Captain America who had been possessed was worth destroying Knull, or the possibility of defeating and destroying Knull. That's the price you pay as you become a hero. And so with Steve Rogers able to kind of regain himself, right, relying on his friends to kind of bolster him back up again, then as Captain America, back to business as usual, right? So he helps to save basically a handful of people. He destroys some of the symbiotes in a tunnel, and is like, okay guys, like this is it, right? Like this is it. And it's one of the cool things because he basically says, like, we've all gone through enough hell that it's easy for them to go back and forth. It's a comfort, at least for me, right? Bucky said my convictions had to be louder, stronger, but their belief in me drives back the darkness just as much. And he says, I don't know what monster will try to slip through the cracks of self-doubt next, use us for their own cause. All I know is this, it's time to get back into the fight. And that's the conviction and the nature of Steve Rogers. That yes, there's self-doubt. Steve Rogers struggles just like everybody else. He's not some guy that has this immutable, unshakable conviction on the right thing to do, and he knows the right thing to do every time, and he never doubts the decisions that he makes. But he's a man who doubts himself just as much as anybody else does. But what makes Captain America so different than your average Joe running around who's muscle-clad and so on is that he understands that while there is self-doubt, what's more important than that is conquering that self-doubt and looking at that and saying, one, where's it coming from? And two, is it right? And if doubting myself in that way is the right thing to do, then I'll take time to answer those questions. But if doubting myself comes from fear and is unfounded, then the hell with it. We got more important things to do. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.